Dirty Bird podcast contains foul language and is not appropriate for young fledglings. Listener discretion is advised. Our intro music is brought to you by Ricky Pistone, aka Dick Piston. And our outro music is brought to you by the Sidewalk Slammers. Check them out wherever you get your music.
Are you looking for a podcast today with ornithology and humor you crave? Well, I know all these guys and it's birds they like. It's Dirty Bird, yeah, they're just a couple guys who really like birds. It's Dirty Bird, yeah, they're pretty dirty, but they really like birds.
Hello, and welcome to Dirty Bird Podcast, a podcast that's serious about birds, but nothing else. I'm Dr. John, and in each episode, I pick an individual bird species. I do all the research, read lots of research articles, books, like all the stuff I can find, and try to bring you a nice, usually 1 hour episode talking all about the bird. I tend to record outside, which I'm doing today. I'm in the Monongahela National Forest in West Virginia, a beautiful forest. It is a chilly, overcast March day. I'm up near Bowden Cave. Longtime listeners will recognize Bowden Cave from my cuckoo episode, from my oil bird episode. I'm actually right by 3 waterfalls. You can probably hear them. I hope you can hear them. It's a nice ambiance. And something nice to listen to because the birds seem to be a little gloomy today. I haven't really heard much bird activity. I was hoping to find some ramps out here, but I think I'm just a little bit too early. But I bet you in 2 weeks this place will be bursting with ramps, which are really cool, wild kind of garlic onion that I love to... Oh, no. Shit. Well, that was fun. So I'm recording kind of on a slope, and I guess the weight was off, and the chair tipped over that I'm using to prop up my laptop and my recording equipment. I went chasing for it down a hill, but everything seems to be okay. One of the joys of recording outside. So where were we? Oh yeah, talking about ramps. Okay. Yeah, I like to forage and gather them. But let's launch into the episode now. In this episode, I'll be talking all about the red-tailed hawk. Hawks have been requested multiple times. Everybody likes a bird of prey. Thank you for everybody who requests episodes, requests birds. I have a list. I do try to get around to them. If I've forgotten, feel free to reach out and tell me, John, you're being an idiot. Come on. Cover my favorite bird. This is a pretty well-studied bird, so there's a lot of information out there. I tried to kind of be succinct about it and boil it down to the best stuff. This probably will be one of the longer episodes. There's also a lot of these raptors in captivity due to injuries from hitting cars or building collisions. And then that makes it so they can't be released in the wild. So you very easily can get a chance to see red-tailed hawks up close if you go to a wildlife sanctuary or a zoo. I'm excited to begin this episode with a Native American cultural story. I haven't done that in a while, but first, before I launch into that, I want to give you this episode's bird watch. This one comes from my father-in-law, who we haven't heard from in a while. So without further ado, here's Punchy Joe. All right, Punchy Joe. Give me your bird watch.
Okay. So it's getting ready to snow. We're supposed to have like 6-8 inches of snow. Of course, we're in Tidewater, Virginia, off the Chesapeake. The other day, I saw several hundred robins going north. I'm assuming when I go home later today, I'll probably see them going south. I heat a lot with the wood stove, supplemental heat. And the one thing that I always enjoy is when I'm cutting word, the bluebirds come and watch me, and the chickadees and a few other birds. And as soon as I'm done, they take over and go scour everywhere I've touched, and they find lots of food. Now the other one in winter, we're on a creek, is we get to see pelicans, and it's a kind of a rarity. They come in around December and last till about March. And they come in, and it's just amazing that they can catch fish when it seems like nothing else can. And I'm talking like when it's windy, it's dusk, and I see them dive, and then you'll see them throw their neck back and swallow a fish. And I was like, I go out there, and I've looked and looked and looked, and I cannot find a fish. Now, the other thing is they say crabs hibernate. And I was like, if that's true, then how come there's crab claws on my dock in the winter? And there are some right now. Now, the other one would be eagles. They are so overrated. I find the eagle, he's a scavenger, he's a cheat, he steals. The young eagles harass the seagulls, which have lived on my pier as long as I can remember. So every fall around Thanksgiving, they come and they just hang out until early spring, and then they leave. I do feed them a little bit of whatever scraps I have, potato peels, old bread, anything like that. But the eagles constantly harass the seagulls, and there's no benefit to it. I have watched eagles, two of them try to catch a seagull, and it was hilarious. I think after about 20 minutes they gave up, but the seagull was smart enough to dive underwater and go underneath piers, and it just flummoxed the eagles to where they didn't know what to do. Now, they also say blue herons typically migrate, but there's kind of like the Canada geese in our area. They don't migrate anymore. I have seen them disappear for a little while, but that's about it. The same way with an egret. Now, egret, I don't see nearly as many as I do blue herons, but the egrets are pretty consistent as well, which you would think they wouldn't be. But they are.
What are you doing? What's your fault?
Recording Joe's Birdwatch. And that was my wife, Lauren, that kind of came in on the end there. Always great to hear from Punchy Joe. If you want to send me your bird watch, if it's just recordings of birds that you have, or, a recent experience you've had with a bird, or a cool experience you've had with a bird, feel free to just send it on in and we'll open the show with it. I also have a new review on Apple Podcast from Kestrel Lover that says, "My favorite bird there is a small and mighty. I am in love with this podcast, informative and fun." Thank you, Kestrel Lover. I love Kestrels too. And thank you for leaving on the Apple Podcast. It really helps people find the show. So let's launch into this Native American cultural story. I couldn't find exactly what tribe this came from, but from the references of North America being an island of dirt on the back of a giant turtle, I think it comes from the tribes of northeastern North America, like the Lenape or the Iroquois, who refer to Turtle Island in their creation stories, Turtle Island being North America. Anyway, here we go with the tale of how the hawk got its red tail. This story takes place during the beginning of the world, after the first dirt was placed on the turtle's back in order to form North America. Then the Creator began to create the animals of the world. When he created the birds, he first created the eagle, who soared high up in the sky. He then created the hawk, smaller in size, and the hawk took up position in the sky below the eagle. While the eagle had a broad, expansive vision of the world below, the hawk had a keener eyesight to see small details. One day, both hawk and eagle saw the same prey item and swooped for it. Eagle was twice the size of hawk and thought it had the right to take the meal since it was the superior bird. With talons outstretched, he plunged towards hawk, making a grab at him. But hawk was agile and twisted out of the way, turning upside down to lock talons with eagle. The cries of both birds echoed throughout the land as they spiraled and fought in the air. Even though the prey had now escaped, the birds continued to fight viciously. Eagle's larger size began to pay off, and it outmuscled the hawk and threw it to the ground. Hawk hit the ground hard. His head ached, and the world grew dim around it. But as Eagle landed beside him, ready to land the finishing blow, Hawk rolled onto his back and raised his claw for the final battle. Even though he knew he would lose, fire blazed in his eyes, and he prepared to die fighting. Eagle saw the fierce look in Hawk's eyes and knew he would fight to the death. He respected the courageous spirit of the bird, and just as he stabbed down his beak with the finishing blow, he instead turned his beak to the side, slashing his own leg. He then dripped his own blood onto the tail feathers of the hawk, staining them red in a sign of respect. Since then, the hawk's tail has been red, and the hawk and eagle share the skies together as brothers. That's a great story. Native American tales always have a cool way to tie in like mythology on why animals exhibit some of the behavioral traits they have, some of the physical characteristics they have. I love there that eagle is like, no, I'm the superior bird. I deserve the food, because that's totally how they are in real life. So let's start off talking about the red-tailed hawk by talking about its scientific name. It's Buteo jamaicensis. The genus Buteo contains large-bodied raptors. Interestingly, the term hawk is a New World term, and in the Old World, birds that in North America we would typically call hawks, they call buzzards. Hawk is really broad and non-specific term that has been used to refer to really any bird of prey over time. If you read older texts, especially from medieval times, you'll see references to woodhawks, chicken hawks, sparrow hawks. Remember from my osprey episode, the colloquial name for the osprey is fishhawk. So hawk was used for a lot of birds that weren't necessarily closely related, especially with falcons. If you listen to my peregrine falcon episode, you'll know that falcons, while similar to hawks and eagles, are not closely related at all and are just an example of convergent evolution. The Buteoraptors, to which our red-tailed hawk belongs, were sometimes colloquially known as hawk buzzards. Buteo actually means buzzard in Latin. The species name jamaicensis comes from Jamaica, which is where the first red-tailed hawk specimen was officially cataloged and given a scientific name in Carl Linnaeus's Systema Naturae. So to describe the species, of course, the red-tailed hawk has a red tail. It's really the most distinctive feature on this bird. It's a cinnamon red color and located on the top of the tail, but you may be able to see some red from below the tail, or the bottom of the tail might just look pale. Another good field marker is looking at their wing undersides. Red-tailed hawks usually have mostly pale wings with a black border around the edges. Really, the best way to identify these birds is by their size and body shape. Their body shape is typical for Buteo birds, who typically hunt in grasslands and fields. They have large, broad, and rounded wings and a short, wide tail. And here we go again talking about wing aspect ratio. Longtime listeners are probably sick of me talking about aerodynamics of birds, but basically short, fat wings equal a low wing aspect ratio, which is good for maneuverability, while long, skinny wings equal a high wing aspect ratio, which is good for energy efficiency and staying airborne. Red-tailed hawks have sort of an in-between, because while their wing shape allows them to have maneuverability and low wing aspect ratio compared to, say, an albatross, their wings are large for their body size, and they also have that huge tail that can fan out and add to their wing surface area. And this is where wing loading comes in, another aerodynamic principle. Wing loading is basically a bird's body weight compared to the area of its wings. The smaller that number, a little bit of wind, appropriate for talking about aerodynamics. The smaller that number for the wing aspect ratio, their body weight over the area of their wing, that means that the bird is lighter and has bigger wings and less energy is needed to keep it aloft. Red-tailed hawks have a low wing loading ratio that allows them to circle in thermals and stay aloft for hours. This is often where you will see them. When they flap, their wing beats are slow, heavy, and deliberate, which helps tell them apart from accipiters like Cooper's hawks that do a much faster flap glide. Red-tailed hawks will sometimes face into the wind and get the aerodynamics just right so that they can hold their wings still and stay airborne in one spot, allowing them to scan the ground for prey with precision. You may also see them use wind gusts to propel them by turning slightly to the side and use their body like a kite to catch the wind. If they find a prey item, you'll see them swoop down in a slow, controlled dive with wings outstretched. This is in contrast to falcons that perform swift, plunging dives. Often they will pin their prey down to the ground to subdue it. Red-tailed hawks are often seen perching on fence posts, light poles, and tree branches. If you're in North America and see a big bird of prey perched along a roadside, it's probably a red-tailed hawk. There's a lot of color variation to red-tailed hawks based on age and region. In general, they are mostly brown with some white underfeathers. Their underside is mostly pale with some darker feather accents, especially around the edges of the wings. I'll talk a little more about their color morphs when I get into the subspecies and evolution section. Their eyes are yellow when juveniles and become darker brown with age. Birds can also be aged based on plumage changes. I'm not going to go into super detail on this because, again, it varies a lot with regions. But generally in their first year, red-tailed hawks do not have that signature red tail. It's actually a dark brown. Their wing markings are also darker and bolder, but become lighter with age. Telling males from females is pretty hard unless you're really familiar with studying red-tailed hawks, and a lot of the times it's just done with genetics to confirm. However, if you see a pair together, the larger hawk is most likely the female, as females tend to be larger than males. So first off, red-tailed hawks, they can be kind of hard to tell apart from vultures when you see them soaring. Sometimes they're even mixed in the same thermal air currents as vultures. That's called a kettle when there's a big group of birds all kind of acting like bubbles rising to the top of a pot as they ride a thermal upwards in the air. But remember the two North American vultures, the black and turkey vultures, are going to be larger than red-tailed hawks. They have sharply contrasting black and white on their wings. Black vultures have just white tips, while turkey vultures have white along almost the entire underside and some black shoulder coloring. Vultures also do that rocking motion while gliding, which I have not observed red-tailed hawks do. Some other hawk relatives can be hard to tell apart from red-tailed hawks. A good way, though, is to look at the tail. Yeah, red-tailed hawks have red tails, but a lot of other hawks are going to have like barring on their tails or banded tails. The red-tailed hawk doesn't have that. More woodland-dwelling hawks like Coopers or sharp-shinned hawks are easily told apart by their more pointed wings and skinny tails. Remember, the red-tailed hawk is going to have very broad, rounded wings. It's going to have this very wide tail. And everybody knows what a red-tailed hawk sounds like because it is a very popular bird call in Hollywood. Often the red-tailed hawk sound gets played when it's not even a red-tailed hawk. Often it's a bald eagle, and they like play the red-tailed hawk sound because they're like, oh, the bald eagle sounds kind of dumb. I'll tell you, this is one of my pet peeves, and there's such a small subset of us like dedicated birders that can recognize bird calls. And like in a movie, characters will supposed to be in like a certain area, like they're supposed to be in New York, and you'll hear like bird calls that are like obviously from California, and you're like, what the hell? Like that is not right. So I always appreciate when I'm, or a loon calls. There's always loon calls put to try to make things seem like eerie and stuff. And I'm like, a loon would not be, in this environment. Red-tailed hawks don't only give that call, though. They also give croaking calls as warning sounds. And of course, their nestlings make little peeps. As far as where you're going to find red-tailed hawks, they have a super wide distribution across North and Middle America, ranging from just south of the tundra in Canada all the way down to Panama. They can also be found on several Caribbean islands. On these islands, they're usually the apex predator of their environment and the largest native carnivore. Across their range, there are populations that are migratory, semi-migratory, and others that are stationary. The northernmost red-tailed hawks in Canada, Alaska, and the very northern part of the U.S. are entirely migratory, for the most part. They exhibit leapfrog migratory behavior, with the northernmost hawks departing in the first autumn. Then when the next most southern group of red-tailed hawks migrates, they will leapfrog over where the more northern hawks have decided to spend the winter and go a little bit further south. This is repeated by subsequent migrating hawks coming from more southern latitudes. Once you get into the US and Mexico, the red-tailed hawks there are pretty variable on whether they migrate or not. They may stay put for the winter, but if the weather is pretty bad, they may just decide, fuck this, I'm going south. We're going on vacation. Migratory behavior also varies by subspecies and populations, where some appear to be more weather hardy than others. For example, apparently there's documentation of red-tailed hawks in Alaska remaining year-round, while during a harsh winter in Wisconsin, many young red-tailed hawks from there migrated all the way to Mexico. So red-tailed hawks are kind of like, snowbirds, like, how you call people that migrate, kind of go south every winter, snowbirds, and then they'll go back up to their homes in the north. They'll kind of have like two homes or whatever, but red-tailed hawks are pretty much like that. Some red-tailed hawks born in Southern California appear to migrate north in the summer. This seems especially true of juveniles. During migration, hawks will funnel through mountain passes, which results in some amazing bird watching. Hawk Ridge in Duluth, Minnesota has had a record 15,000 hawks spotted migrating through there one season. The territorial home range of red-tailed hawks can vary drastically on whether it's an urban or rural environment, and it's also based on habitat type and how much prey availability there is. I read the typical territory size is between 150 to 300 hectares, that's 370 to 740 acres. And the type of habitat that they like is going to be kind of open lands, like grasslands, maybe some broken wooded areas. That's why you see them along roadsides so much, because it kind of creates artificial broken woodscapes. They apparently really don't like wetlands. And I'll talk a little bit more about this later on in the show with their conservation and population. As far as what they eat, they are generalist predators. They pretty much eat whatever they can catch and subdue. They're highly adaptable to eat prey that is available based on location, and then they'll also adapt based on weather changes. Across most of their range, they prefer small mammalian prey. Pellet bone analysis and observational studies have confirmed them eating voles, mice, wood rats, rabbits, snowshoe hares, jackrabbits, ground squirrels, and tree squirrels. They'll occasionally take larger mammals, almost always when these mammals are juveniles and smaller in their body size. They've been known to prey on juvenile nine-banded armadillos and possums. There's also an instance of a hawk killing and eating an adult skunk. Bones of even larger animals like foxes, raccoons, and all the way up to horses have been found in red-tailed hawk, pellets and from their feeding areas. But these are almost certainly from carrion that they consumed and not from a kill. But I don't know about that. I feel like I could totally see a red-tailed hawk taking on a horse and killing it. Sort of like that, oh God, what was that episode I did about that? The name escapes me, but that eagle, in New Zealand that was so large it reportedly carried off and ate human children. That thing could definitely fuck up a horse. They also eat birds, usually larger-sized birds and mostly terrestrial birds. Red-tailed hawks aren't going to be, chasing after a chickadee or a titmouse the way a Cooper's hawk would. Well, not usually, at least. Like I said, these birds are highly adaptable, and it appears, especially on Caribbean islands, they will eat songbirds. They'll even go after, little tiny warblers. But the birds they seem to prefer are pheasants, bobwhites, starlings, and blackbirds. They've been known to kill large waterfowl like red-breasted mergansers, mallards, and even an invasive Egyptian goose. Good job killing invasive species. I like killing the starlings. Good job. The young of great blue herons, wild turkeys, trumpeter swans, and sandhill cranes are all prime food sources for red-tailed hawks, if they can get past their large protective parents, that is. They also prey on reptiles, especially snakes. And occasionally they'll eat insects. This seems to be especially true for juveniles who are not as good at catching vertebrate prey, and so they may forage for beetles or grasshoppers on the ground and even consume earthworms. Juveniles also appear to like eating frogs. Rarely they'll eat aquatic life. They've been known to eat crabs and rarely have been known to catch and eat fish. I think I saw an account of one catching and eating a catfish, which was pretty impressive. In El Yunque National Park in Puerto Rico, red-tailed hawks exhibit different prey-feeding habits based on habitat. In the lowland areas that are more grassy fields and broken forest, they eat mostly mammals that they catch on the ground. However, in the high-elevation rain and cloud forests, they prey mainly on lizards, amphibians, and birds that they catch in the canopy of the trees. They usually hunt from a perch, but will also hunt on the wing. They're pretty adaptable with their hunting strategies, and we'll talk about some unique strategies they use in a second. When perch hunting, they tend to face downhill or in an area protected from the wind, likely to avoid fighting with the wind if they have to swoop down for a kill. They approach their prey at a very flat angle, mostly gliding and maybe doing a few flaps. At the last second, as they get right up to their prey, they will twist their wings backwards in a movement called supination. Basically the same kind of movement you do with your arm as if you're trying to hold a bowl of soup in your palm. This brings them to an abrupt halt and allows them to extend their talons out in a snatch. An experiment done on swooping red-tailed hawks found that the talons have a velocity of 650 centimeters per second, which is 14 miles per hour when the red-tailed hawk snatches a food item. They use their large posteriorly positioned hallux to grip prey against their other 3 forward-oriented toes, and often they'll kind of pin it to the ground when they do this. The hallux is pretty large for its body size at 1.2 inches. The bald eagle's hallux is around 2 inches or so red-tailed hawks are pretty close. If prey happens to escape, they will actually run after it on the ground, which sounds hilarious. And red-tailed hawks are sight-dependent hunters. They're using their eyes to find their prey. They're not, sniffing the way vultures do. They're not listening the way that owls do. It's all sight. They've been documented hunting in pairs. I've seen this where a pair will circle together. They'll also hunt as a pair where one hawk will act as a distraction or a flush while the other swoops in for the kill. This seems especially true for squirrels, where one hawk will kind of make the squirrel go to the other side of the tree where the other hawk will swoop in and kill it. In the Sonoran Desert of the American Southwest, red-tailed hawks may follow American badgers to try and grab opportunistic food items such as birds or rodents flushed by the badger, or even stealing prey that the badger has spent the hard work of digging up. On the campus of Henderson State University in Arkansas in 2012, a hawk was observed hunting squirrels by running along tree limbs after them. It was also observed shaking squirrel nests and probing into tree cavities with its beaks and talons. These strategies seem to be successful. The hawk caught at least one adult squirrel that was hiding in a nest, but eventually mobbing crows and mockingbirds beat it off. That brings me to another point. You'll often see the bold birds of the forest, crows, mockingbirds, and blue jays, joining up in groups called mobs to drive off hawks. If you hear a big ruckus coming from your backyard birds, make sure you go look what's going on because it's probably a hawk. And I guess I'll end the feeding section by talking about a common rumor you hear about red-tailed hawks preying on dogs or cats. So red-tailed hawks only weigh about 3 to 4 pounds, and even the smallest dog is usually 10 pounds, so it's highly unlikely that a red-tailed hawk would prey on an animal that it knows it can't easily subdue or pick up and fly away with. However, there are reports of red-tailed hawks attacking small dog breeds. I couldn't find a confirmed case of an hawk actually killing a small dog, but I did find a pretty dramatic one from Swedesboro, New Jersey, where a small dog was actually picked up and carried away by a red-tailed hawk. The owner tried to chase it in his truck, but lost sight of it. 2 days later, the dog was found in a fenced yard about a mile away. It was scratched up and traumatized, but okay otherwise. Most small dog attacks are not going to be due to the hawk trying to actually eat the dog, but more from territorial defense. Red-tailed hawks become sexually mature around 2 to 4 years of age. Northward migration occurs earliest for those that are nesting in the more southern latitudes and can occur as early as February. On the northernmost part of their range, red-tailed hawks may not arrive on their breeding grounds until June. They do a courtship flight to kind of establish their bond. They'll fly in high, slow circles together. The male will dive steeply and then shoot back up over and over, making a series of W's in the sky. He will then approach the female from above and touch her with his extended legs. It's akin to sort of putting your arm around a girl to see if she likes you. And if she likes him, then they may end up grasping talons and plummeting in a spiral towards the ground together, breaking apart at the last second. We've seen this with several bird species, from bald eagles to white-throated swifts. It must be something innate to birds and just the freedom of flying. They don't actually copulate during these dives, though. This occurs with the female. She'll perch and then turn her rump up, and then the male mounts from behind. They do a sort of twisting motion so that the male is able to touch his cloaca to hers. So I guess red-tailed hawks do it doggy style. And they usually mate for life, but they will, if a mate dies, then they will find another mate. And sometimes it's pretty quick. It's like the next day they'll find a new mate. They tend to nest on the tallest trees that they can find. Usually these are deciduous trees. The nest is usually placed at or near the edge of a forest with fields nearby for easy food sources. They may also nest on cliffs, especially in the western U.S. And they'll also nest on power lines, billboards, and cell towers. A study done out of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, actually found significantly higher nest productivity for red-tailed hawks nesting on human-made structures compared to those nesting in trees. This possibly is because the human-made structures hold on to ambient heat better and offer some protection from nest predators. They show nest fidelity. Couples will come back to the same nest year after year, will add to the nest year after year and make it bigger, and also tidy up any breakdown that might have happened over the winter. Both male and female will build the nest together using sticks. Nests can get as large as 6 feet high and 3 feet across. They line the nest with strips of bark, dry vegetation, and fresh vegetation to make it nice and comfy. They lay 1 to 3 eggs, but from what I've read, it's usually 2. They might lay as many as 5 in rare cases. They incubate these eggs for about a month. Egg incubation is mainly done by the female, but the male will take some shifts. When they hatch, the nestlings are featherless, blind, and really pathetic. They can't even raise their heads. Nestling red-tailed hawks are known as ISs. This is a term from falconry for a nesting hawk. Apparently it comes from an English mispronunciation of a French word that means from the nest. I'm not even going to try to whip out my French accent here. I'm just moving on. ISs. Female feeds the ISs by ripping up meat into small shreds. By day 2, these nestlings are more active and strong and begin to peep. By day 15, they're able to sit up. By day 21, they are starting to look more like little hawks and will strike out with their talons at any intruders. Aw, so cute, attacking intruders with their talons. They start flapping their wings and testing out their developing feathers at around a month old. By day 45, they're usually ready to leave the nest. Siblicide and runting do occur with hawks. Sometimes parents will even push the weaker nestling out of the nest to concentrate more on the 1 or 2 stronger nestlings that have a higher likelihood of survival. Many raptor species like peregrine falcons, red-shouldered hawks, and Mississippi kites appear to increase their reproductive success in urban settings, possibly due to decrease in nest predators and more climactic stability. Red-tailed hawks, however, have been shown to produce smaller broods and fledge fewer young in urban settings compared to rural. This does kind of conflict with that other study that I read that, found that when they nested on human structures, they did better than ones nesting in trees. But I guess if you look at a whole, if they're nesting, in an urban area, the red-tailed hawks don't do as well. It's theorized that as large birds, red-tailed hawks are less maneuverable in urban settings and are at high risk for collisions with cars and man-made structures. Also, the mammalian prey they heavily rely on for food may be less available. And as we'll talk about below in the conservation section, red-tailed hawks are pretty prone to poisoning by organophosphates that are used as pesticides and anticoagulants that are used as rat poison. In an urban setting, people are going to be using rat poison, so even the rats that are around for the red-tailed hawks to catch, they're going to get poisoned by. Abandoned red-tailed hawk nests are really important for other bird species who use them for their nests. Everything from great horned owls, crows, ravens, squirrels, peregrine falcons, and many songbird species will use old abandoned red-tailed hawk nests. So they're a very important, ecological species. It's like woodpeckers. Like woodpeckers make their nests, and even if, they're gone, wood ducks and titmice and chickadees and all these other birds are going to use them. There's been a couple bizarre red-tailed hawk breeding stories. In 1973 in Orange County, California, a red-tailed hawk throuple was observed, where 1 male and 2 females were observed attending to a nest. The females shared the duty of incubating the eggs while the male brought food. This throuple appeared to be successful as they fledged all 4 of their young. I also read a crazy account from 2017 in Sydney, British Columbia, where a pair of bald eagles captured a juvenile red-tailed hawk from its nest and brought it to their own, presumably planning to eat it. However, once they got to the nest, I don't know if the 3 bald eagle fledglings were like, "Oh, Mom, Dad, can we keep it?" Because they actually didn't end up killing the red-tailed hawk juvenile. They adopted it and raised it as one of their own. The red-tailed hawk that was nicknamed Spunky by excited bird watchers who monitored this nest actually successfully fledged. So it's a happy ending. So let's talk about some of the adaptations that make a red-tailed hawk such a successful bird and such an expert flyer too. Wind tunnel testing with red-tailed hawks really shows how they are masters of the sky. A test performed with a red-tailed hawk named Petey subjected him to multiple upward wind gusts. In response to the wind gusts, Petey would pitch down his wings and raise up his tail, essentially performing a simulated dive with the same downward velocity as the upward gust to help him maintain a stable position. And as I mentioned earlier, red-tailed hawks are visual predators. They have really good eyesight. I've talked a lot about avian eyes on the show before, my bird bods episode and my oil bird episode, just to name a couple. I found a study that examined the pecten oculi of red-tailed hawks. This is a special eye structure unique to birds. Basically, it has a lot of blood vessels and acts to supply the avian retina with nutrition. Bird eyes are packed full of sensory cells, much denser than humans. I think in my oil bird episode I talked about how that species' light receptor cells were 10 times that of humans. The red-tailed hawk's pecten oculi is highly folded, like an accordion. This increases its surface area and ability to provide more nutrition to a very active eye. I sort of think of it like a brain. If you've ever seen a human brain compared to, say, a rat's, you'll notice the human brain has a lot of folds and grooves, while the rat brain is pretty much smooth. Some of the same things are going on here. The red-tailed hawk's pecten oculi shows much more sophistication and specialization for a highly vision-reliant species. This is comparison to a kiwi that is basically blind and has a flat pecten oculi. Kiwis, those little birds, they pretty much just rely on their nose, and they're nocturnal, so they don't need to really use their eyes. All right, for this later part of the show, let's go into some of the diseases that affect red-tailed hawks, talk about their conservation, their population, and then, of course, end on evolution. So, red-tailed hawks can be infected by avian follicular myelinopathy. This is a disease which still has an unknown cause, but is devastating to bald eagles and some waterfowl. Basically, it's like a weird disease that affects the nervous system of birds. Luckily, red-tailed hawks don't seem to really be clinically affected by it. Even when they have brain lesions from the disease, they are just fine. They're acting normally. But that does make them potential vectors for the disease, because it appears the disease is passed by eating infected flesh. Wild red-tailed hawks have been found infected with avian pox, sort of like the measles of the bird world, that causes painful lumps on the legs, feet, and around the beak and eyes. This can weaken and kill birds. Red-tailed hawks and many other birds of prey are prone to infection by a parasite called Frankelia microti. They're a type of protozoa, so not quite a bacteria, but similar, and their life cycle revolves around being eaten as cysts by rodents before ultimately being eaten by birds of prey, where they undergo their sexual reproduction in the intestines to form more cysts that get excreted by the hawk as poop, and then eaten by more rodents, and, circle of life. Also can be infected by the protozoa leucocytozoon, which is transmitted from blood-sucking black flies. And they are potential hosts for Toxoplasma gondii. This is also a protozoa that has an intermediate phase in rodents. You've probably learned about this parasite because it's the one that can change the brains of rodents to make them more bold and more likely to be eaten by their definitive hosts, which are felines. But it can also infect a wide variety of other accidental hosts, including humans. It's the reason why pregnant women shouldn't clean litter boxes. Birds of prey can also get infected by it, and red-tailed hawks have been shown in laboratory settings to be able to be infected by Toxoplasma gondii by ingesting cysts. Red-tailed hawks have been found dead from West Nile virus, and apparently red-tailed hawks can get coronary artery disease, congestive heart failure, and heart attacks just like humans do. This occurred with an unfortunate captive red-tailed hawk in Saskatoon, Canada in 2006, who presented to the vet very sick and died, with autopsies showing that he had died from several heart attacks. apparently these conditions are fairly well reported in the Psittaciformes family of birds that contains parrots. And it's thought that due to their diet that contains a bunch of fatty nuts, they're more prone to coronary artery disease. It's thought that the captive hawk's diet of one-day-old chicks who are really high in fat and his lack of exercise in captivity contributed to his cardiovascular disease. There's definitely a lesson for us humans there. Great horned owls are known nest predators of red-tailed hawks. Great horned owls are terrifying if you're a bird. I mean, they do this to bald eagles too. Just in the night, this monster just comes to your nest and steals your young. It's insane. Ravens are also nest predators of red-tailed hawk nestlings. Red-tailed hawks and Swainson's hawks are sort of arch enemies. Both feed on similar prey and are large, closely related buteo hawk birds, and they specialize on open plains and grasslands. Swainson's hawks are more adept to hunting on the wing, while red-tailed hawks rely on perches. Even though the Swainson's hawk is smaller than the red-tailed hawk, it can actually outcompete the red-tailed hawk and push red-tailed hawks from territories that contain relatively few perches, since the Swainson's hawk is more adept to hunting on the wing. Not only do they drive off red-tailed hawks by eating the food out from under them, they will also attack them relentlessly. In Antelope, California, 83% of conflicts between red-tailed hawks and Swainson's hawks were initiated by the Swainson's hawks, whose smaller body size was actually an advantage because it allowed them to be more agile than the red-tailed hawk and beat them in aerial combat. Sort of like World War II with, the little Spitfires versus bombers coming in, they're going to beat the big bombers. Red-tailed hawks come into conflict occasionally with a wide variety of predatory birds as they compete for food sources and territory. As far as real threats to juvenile and adult red-tailed hawks, though, great horned owls, golden eagles, and bald eagles seem to be the only ones where these conflicts can turn deadly. So those are their natural predators. Let's talk about some of the man-made stuff that kills them. In 1990 in British Columbia in Fraser Delta, a sick red-tailed hawk that later died was determined to have died from organophosphate poisoning, which is a type of insecticide. The hawk had signs of ingested waterfowl, and likely the duck had accumulated high levels of toxins from eating pesticide-treated seeds, and later passed those on to the red-tailed hawk when it either scavenged the duck or killed the sick animal. There's multiple accounts of red-tailed hawks killed by rat poison. They ingest a sick or dead rodent that has ingested the rat poison, which is basically a super powerful blood thinner that makes the rat have internal hemorrhages. When the rat eats this, they end up having internal hemorrhaging too. Nestlings are also affected when their parents feed them poisoned meat. In a study in 2015 to 2016 in Reno, Nevada, a red-tailed hawk nest that was monitored for those 2 years had 2 nestlings die from rat poison exposure. Red-tailed hawks do appear to be highly adaptable to human presence, though. They are smart birds. In a sort of bizarre experiment done in 1989, captive red-tailed hawks were buzzed by low-flying helicopters to see the effect. At first, the parents responded by either aggressive or nest-fleeing behaviors, but they quickly realized that the helicopters were not a real threat and learned to ignore them. Unfortunately, red-tailed hawks are a common bird for airplane strikes. Between 1990 and 2014, over 2,000 red-tailed hawks struck civilian aircraft in the U.S., making them the 8th most common bird species to collide with planes. 213 of these strikes resulted in emergency landings, with 8 human injuries and 1 death. They also appear very prone to wind turbine strikes. At the Altamont Pass Wind Resource Area in California between 1998 and 2000, of 316 bird fatalities, 96 of those were red-tailed hawks. Hawks are known predators of chickens, which sometimes leads to them being shot despite their legal protection throughout their range, and also leads to their colloquial name of chicken hawk for the red-tailed hawk. As far as their population, red-tailed hawks appear to be doing pretty well. They're arguably the most plentiful raptor in North America. Between 1966 and 2015, their population in the U.S. increased by 1.7%. The current breeding population is estimated at 3.1 million. Red-tailed hawk nesting success appears to be pretty good, but varies widely across its range and also depending on if the hawk is in a rural, suburban, or urban environment. On the low end, I saw studies that found 63.7% nesting success, while the high end was 93%, although 70 to 80% seems to be the typical range. Really, nesting success in an area comes down to how much habitat there is to hunt in. Fallow land, basically open fields left to their own devices, are the best habitat for red-tailed hawks to hunt in, followed by cropland and then woodlots. Wetlands are particularly bad hunting habitat for red-tailed hawks, and areas with more wetlands have the lowest red-tailed hawk productivity. Maybe it's because red-tailed hawks just don't like getting their feet wet. One surprisingly helpful habitat for red-tailed hawks is golf courses. I was really surprised by this. I mean, from a nature lover standpoint, I sort of hate golf courses. They waste a lot of space. There's non-native grasses. They use a lot of water. However, red-tailed hawks seem to thrive on the artificial open grassland and fractured woodland of golf courses. The same study out of Reno in 2015 that I mentioned earlier found a 92% nesting success for red-tailed hawks on golf courses. So if you do love to golf and you're golfing and you see some red-tailed hawks, just know they are thankful for you. Red-tailed hawk nesting success also is dependent on prey availability, which can change based on season and climatic variation. We've talked on the show before about animals, usually rodents, that have sort of a cyclical boom and bust cycle. On bust years, red-tailed hawks may suffer lower nesting success and vice versa. The oldest known red-tailed hawk was 30 years old, 8 months. He was originally banded in 1981 in Michigan, and his body was recovered in the same state in 2011. As I mentioned at the top of the show, red-tailed hawks do pop up in rehabilitation centers a good amount. They seem to be pretty prone to collisions, and most often they are rehabbed for broken wings or head injuries. There's also some cases of people shooting them. The goal of wildlife rehabilitators is for the bird to eventually be released into the wild. Of course, this doesn't always happen if the injuries are too great and the bird must either unfortunately be euthanized or live in captivity. A study I read used recovery of banded red-tailed hawks to compare survival rates between red-tailed hawks that had been rehabilitated and released into the wild and those that had never required rehabilitation. This study was done over a huge time frame using data from recovered banded hawks from 1974 to 2013. This large time frame does make sense since the upper limit of the red-tailed hawk lifespan is 30 years. Rehabilitated hawks were found to have a lower annual survival rate than the never rehabilitated hawks. That's unsurprising because for the hawks to be rehabilitated, they had to be dealing with injuries in the first place. In fact, 64% of rehabilitated hawks in this study were reported dead within the first year of release. This is super disheartening, but it doesn't belittle the good work that rehab centers do. Even a slim chance at wildlife is worth it. Red-tailed hawks are also a very popular bird in falconry. There's strict laws around falconry, but something surprising that I learned is that it's actually wild-caught birds a lot of the times that people use in falconry. I always assumed they just were captive bred. I don't know why, I just assumed that. The ones allowed to be caught for falconry are called passage birds. They're hawks that have left the nest but are less than 1 year old, making them easier to train. And another note about falconry, apparently falconers are experts at reading their bird's body language and can tell by posture if the birds are hungry, aggressive, or feeling lazy. I would love to go birding with a falconer, and like I'm doing the birding part and they're like, they see a hawk and they're like, oh yeah, he just ate. He's full, he's just showing off. When birds are appearing hungry, they are termed sharp set. Falconers aren't the only ones who can see this mood, though. Apparently potential prey birds can too. An experiment was done that tested mobbing behavior of wild songbirds like blue jays, catbirds, and kingbirds to a red-tailed hawk when he was hungry and giving the sharp set body posture, and when he was well fed and looked full. During tests made over the course of several days, songbirds mobbed more often and more aggressively the hawk when he was hungry versus when he was well fed. So it's kind of cool that other birds too can tell whether a hawk is hungry or not and respond accordingly. All right, y'all, we're going to wrap up with the evolution section. Hawks or buzzards are part of the family Accipitridae. I talk about the origins of this family in my vulture, osprey, and bald eagle episodes, so check those out for more evolutionary info. About accipiters in general, this episode is already running long and there's wind and a little bit of rain, so I'm just going to sort of focus on hawks and their evolution. Cytochrome B analysis of the accipiter family shows a sister relationship between the subfamily Butyonidae that contains hawks and Milvis that contains kites and Haliaetus that contains sea eagles like the bald eagle. One zoomed tree of life has them differentiating from each other at around 13 million years ago. A study that looked at amplified DNA sequences of 28 species within the Butyonidae subfamily found that the most basal members of the group, meaning the ones that seem to have evolved first and therefore the oldest, all are located in South America, such as the white-tailed hawk, the red-backed hawk, the black-collared hawk, and the great black hawk. Go ahead and say great black hawk 3 times fast, I dare you. Oh, God, that's a terrible joke. Okay, the fact that the most basal members reside in South America suggests a neotropical origin for Butyonidae, meaning their ancestral species likely first evolved in the tropics of the Americas. Also, these most basal members mostly feed in large open grasslands like the red-tailed hawk does, so this is most likely an ancestral trait. When you look at the relationships among the Buteo genus, it appears that specialization for woodland hunting occurred independently many times. For example, the broad-winged hawk and the red-shouldered hawk are more closely related to other grassland specialist hawk species than they are to each other. So, it's showing that multiple times among the hawks, really like grassland is kind of their ancestral state, and then multiple times there were hawk species that adapted to woodland hunting. It gets a little messy figuring out the exact timing of radiation out of North America, which the ancestral American hawks did to then form the Old World species. As we'll talk about, there's some intraspecies breeding going on, and also some of these species are very widely distributed. For example, the rough-legged hawk of the American Arctic and subarctic is also found across northern Europe and Asia, where it's termed the rough-legged buzzard. However, DNA analysis does suggest that there were a few major radiations of hawks out of the New World into the Old World. There were 2 major radiation events to Africa, and hawks there showed 2 distinct lineages. Another formed the Asian hawk lineage, and off of that Asian lineage comes the most recent addition to the Buteo genus, the common buzzard. The common buzzard has had a remarkable explosion in population. One zoomed tree of life has them splitting off around 270,000 years ago, and their population now encompasses all of Europe and northern Asia. There's 13 to 16 subspecies of red-tailed hawks, depending on which resource you're consulting. I won't go into detail on each subspecies in this episode. The subspecies do interbreed with each other, but still maintain pretty distinctive plumages and behavioral variations. One zoomed tree of life has the red-tailed hawk forming within the past 3.5 million years ago, with their closest relative being the broad-winged hawk. And these subspecies likely resulted from fragmentation of the red-tailed hawk population into areas of refugia during the last glacial maximum. The western populations appeared to be especially affected by the last glacial maximum, undergoing severe bottlenecking and only recently expanding with the retreat of glaciers in the past few tens of thousands of years. One really cool thing, that study that I mentioned that looked at all the Buteo species DNA, it actually found very little genetic difference between the rufous-tailed hawk, which resides in Chile and Argentina, and the western red-tailed hawk populations, and suggested that the rufous-tailed hawk, rather than being a separate species, could actually be more representative of a subspecies of the red-tailed hawk, and might represent the most southern refugia of the western red-tailed hawks during the last glacial maximum. One subspecies located in Alaska, the Canadian Yukon, and British Columbia that's termed Harlan's hawk looks so distinctly different from other red-tailed hawks with its dark plumage and dark streaking on its tail that it was originally considered a separate species. Another subspecies termed Kreider's hawk is pretty much the exact opposite of Harlan's hawk. It's in the northern Great Plains, and it is distinctively pale. It almost looks like a albino red-tailed hawk. Albino red-tailed hawks do exist, by the way. Albino ones, leucistic ones, but Kreider's hawk is it's a subspecies where it is just very pale in its plumage. There's another subspecies, Buteo jamaicensis coloris. It has a huge range across the western U.S. up into Alaska and shows some genetic evidence that there's been some spicy interspecies breeding between the subspecies of red-tailed hawks and the common buzzard, which must have happened from crossing the Bering Strait. And that's not the only interspecies breeding going on. Ow! Genetic testing of Swainson's hawk and red-tailed hawks indicate there have been at least 3 separate hybridization events between these two species. One of these hybridization events was actually witnessed in Utah, where Hawkwatch International crews observed a Swainson hawk and red-tailed hawk sharing incubation duties on a nest. The single chick, when captured and banded, appeared phenotypically to be a Swainson's hawk. This is in contrast to 2 other hybrids which occurred in Alberta, Canada, that were phenotypically red-tailed hawks. It's unknown if these hybrids were capable of breeding or were sterile. However, there's at least one case of a hybrid between a pharyngeus hawk and a red-tailed hawk that successfully breeded with a red-tailed hawk. This occurred in Wayne County, Utah in 2015. Even within the different subspecies, there's further variations in body size depending on habitat type, with desert or dry climate dwelling birds tending to be larger and wet climate birds tending to be smaller in body size. This may be due to very specific habitat evolutionary selections that have occurred over time, where larger body size conserves more water and is advantageous in dry climates, while in wet climates, large body size is just a waste of resources. One last point, red-tailed hawks don't seem to follow Bergman or Allen's rule. If you don't know what those rules are, I'm not even going to tell you. You just need to listen to more Dirty Bird podcast. My dedicated Dirty Birders out there, you know exactly what I'm talking about with Bergman's and Allen's rules. Well, y'all, that's the episode. I will say one thing, One Zoom Tree of Life, which is a really cool resource I use to kind of, it uses genetic evidence to try to help tell you exactly when different species broke off from each other and who's most closely related to the other one. It's not perfect, but it's a really cool resource, and I would encourage you to go check it out because it's kind of fun to type in a species and zoom in on the tree of life and kind of see where it is. But I noticed they are now allowing people to sponsor a species on their website. So it would be pretty cool if Dirty Bird sponsored a bird. I don't know what bird we would do. What would we do? Definitely like some kind of tit or like, cock of the rock or something like that. So if anyone's interested in helping me sponsor a bird, or anyone out there has an idea about what bird Dirty Bird should sponsor, write in and let me know. Write in and just let me know your bird thoughts. If you want some free stickers, write in, leave me reviews, send me your bird watches. I love hearing from you Dirty Birders. And as always, stay dirty, fellow birdies. Dirty Bird Podcast is brought to you by me, John, with my rotating panel of guests and co-hosts. Thanks for being on the show, everybody. The Dirty Bird theme song is by Ricky Pistone. Check out his groovy and hilarious music videos on YouTube. The outro music you're listening to right now is a song New York Redneck by the Sidewalk Slammers. Check them out wherever you get your music. The Dirty Bird Podcast logo is by the very talented TJ Ranoski. And of course, a shout out to my beautiful wife, Lauren, who created my original logo. Check out the show notes for this episode for a full list of credits for any bird calls or sounds used in the episode. Thanks for listening.
At the track, drive into Brooklyn, ain't never coming back. Tim's on the ground in the concrete jungle. I might get into a little rumble.